Hello, I'm Kirsty Young, and this is a podcast from the Desert Island Discs archive. For rights reasons, we've had to shorten the music. The programme was originally broadcast in 1977, and the presenter was Roy Plumley.
Our castaway this week is a writer and a member of a celebrated family, Miss Jessica Mitford. Could you adapt yourself to loneliness, Miss Mitford? You're on this island. You don't know how long for.
I think I'd rather hate it, actually, unless I had a few records.
You have 8. Does music play a big part in your life?
I'm afraid not really. I only like pop music. I'm not really musical.
Mm-hmm. What's the first one you've chosen to take with you?
After the Ball.
Why do you choose that?
Well, I tried to choose things that were various parts of life. After the Ball was a tremendous song to us. We used to sing it round the piano. My mother played all those kinds of songs, like I'll sing these songs of Araby, and songs of her childhood, you see, and so we sort of grew up with them.
After the dancers leaving, after the stars were gone, many a heart was aching, if we could read them all. Many the hopes that were shattered after the ball.
After the Ball, sung by Florrie Ford. You were the 5th of the 6 Mitford sisters, the daughters of Lord and Lady Redesdale. Life when you were young was a country house one, wasn't it, with a London house for the season?
Yes, mostly country, though, especially for us children.
And did you go to school?
No, we weren't allowed. My mother was very much opposed to the idea of girls going to school at all, so we did not have that pleasure. I should have loved to go, but no.
It was governesses.
All govs.
May we just run through the family list? Your eldest sister was Nancy, who wrote historical biographies.
Well, she also wrote some jolly funny novels, like The Pursuit of Love, in which she guided up our whole family. It was really autobiographical.
Was it?
Mm.
And then Pam, we haven't heard much about Pam.
No, well, Pam always wanted to be a horse when she was a child. She was the only one of the children that didn't actually sort of succeed in fulfilling her childhood ambitions.
Mm-hmm. And your only brother Tom was killed in the last war.
Yes, he was.
Then the 3rd sister Diana, who married Sir Oswald Mosley. And Unity, whose life became a tragedy.
Yes.
And your younger sister Deborah, now the Duchess of Devonshire.
That's it.
You had your own language, I believe.
Well, we had a couple of languages. Unity and I had a whole language called Bowdleditch, into which we could translate anything, because it was actually a language. I mean, it's just like translating from English to French, except that no grown-ups could understand it, fortunately. Mm-hmm. So we used to translate things into Bowdleditch for safe singing in front of the grown-ups, because they wouldn't know what it was.
Could you give us a sample?
Well, one is a song that it was called Sex Appeal Sarah, and the Bowdleditch translation goes like this. Im Zagsa Biddlezildra, mi Battlegrads Bildra, it's Dinamy a Bildranded stage. There was always a sign off of it. That sort of sound.
Yes. Well, it's certainly a private language, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
It takes some getting into.
People on buses couldn't understand it.
I can believe that.
They would point at us and sort of say, I wonder what foreigners they are.
Well, let's have your second record.
I'm Sex Appeal Sarah.
The one you've just been singing?
Absolutely.
Well, who's going to sing it now?
This is going to be by Douglas Byng, comedian.
In English?
Right, exactly.
I'm Sex Appeal Sarah, my body gets better each time I appear on the screen. Oh, I played such rare pranks with dear Dougie Fairbanks, really risky, they'll never have seen. I know all the Lupinos, I go to their vinos. We start off with cocktails and end up with Enos. I'm Slick Sal, and when I was a gal, I was constant and clever and clean.
Douglas Byng singing Sex Appeal Sarah. Of the 6 Mitford sisters, some of them were, shall we say, difficult. Your mother seems to have taken it all quite serenely.
Yes, she was amazing, actually. I don't think I realised how amazing she was until towards the end of her life. Because, I mean, when I was a child, I didn't like her at all. I hated her. Because she was so frightfully strict and cold and unapproachable. And besides not letting us go to school, you see. Mm. But then I began to realise that she probably had rather a thin time of it.
Was there a sort of rapprochement when you were both older?
Oh, there was a terrific rapprochement, but not for a long, long time. Not until after I'd moved to America, remarried, and had a daughter then aged 7 by my first husband. Her name is Constantia Romilly. Mm-hmm. And when Constantia was about 7, she wrote to my mother, thanking her for a present that Mum had sent for Christmas. And she said, in her laborious childish scrawl, "Thank you so much for the present. I wish that you would come and visit us in Oakland one day." And to my absolute consternation, my mother sent a telegram saying, "Have accepted Dinky's invitation, arriving in a fortnight."
And after that, things were different.
She was marvellous. She was absolutely bent on friendship.
Let's have your third record. What's that to be?
The third one is Louise, which is also extremely reminiscent of childhood because we were all madly in love with Maurice Chevalier, as who wouldn't be? I'm sure that anyone listening to his record will be.
Louise, just to see and hear you is joy I never knew, but to be so near you thrills me through and through. Anyone can see why I wanted your kiss. It had to be, but the wonder is this: can it be true someone like you could love me, Louise?
Maurice Chevalier. Now, this rebellious thing that ran in the family, you began saving up running away money very early.
Well, I started saving up, I think, when I was about 12, and that was right after I was totally denied my very last effort to go to school, which was an effort to go to the local grammar school. My mother said, no, absolutely not. So I started running a way account in Drummond's, which is our family bank, sent them 10 shillings, and they wrote back saying that we respectfully acknowledge the 10 shillings. It was a wonderful letter. They signed off, "Your obedient servants."
How splendid.
It was especially splendid when you get to America, because the Bank of America is nobody's obedient servant.
Now, who brought politics into the family in the first place? 2 of your sisters veered off to the extreme right, you to the extreme left. Who started it?
Well, Diana Mosley, then Guinness, and she took up with Sir Oswald Mosley, who was just forming the British Union of Fascists. And I think they're the ones that got Unity interested. In fact, I was probably far more interested than Unity when we were much younger in politics than she was. I mean, she didn't really get interested until she was 18, at which time I was 15. But I was deeply interested by about 13 in pacifism and that sort of thing. And so, actually, I was sort of an anti-fascist before she was a fascist, I think.
There's a scandalous story of you stealing £5 from the proceeds of a Conservative fete and sending it to the Daily Worker.
Well, you see, Bobo and I were both at the fete. My mother used to have these fetes every year, or at least the Conservative Party had them, and my mother would have a stall of produce which we would help sell. And so we were there, and the stall was unattended, except for us. And here's all this lovely money floating around that my mother had earned from the stall. So I said, I think I'll take £5 of that and send it to the Daily Worker. So Unity said, well, I'm going to take £5 and send it to the fascists. So we both did.
Oh, well, it was fair, at any rate. You
Yes,
both had your
equal.
work. Eventually, of course, you used your running away account when you ran away with your first husband, Esmond Romilly.
Yes,
You went off to Spain.
that's right. In the middle of the Spanish War. That was early 1937.
He had served in the International Brigade.
He had. He was one of the youngest volunteers to be in that brigade, and he happened to be in the German battalion because the British battalion was not yet formed when he went over.
Mm-hmm. You were made a ward in Chancery, but that was a step that wasn't very effective.
It was rather hopeless. You see, the idea of being a ward in Chancery is that it gives much more control because a judge can order you to obey curfew, to do whatever he tells you, in fact, on pain of being remanded, say, to a wayward girls' home or something like that. But as I was already out of his jurisdiction, I wrote and pointed this out and said that unless he gave permission for my marriage to Esmond, I might have a large family, and that wouldn't be very proper. So he did give permission.
Yes. How old were you then?
19.
And you were married in Spain?
No, in France, actually, in Bayonne.
Record number 4, please. What
Record number 4 which is the peat bog soldiers, but it's sung in German. It's one of the great Spanish Civil War songs. And the history of this one is that it was actually a song that was composed by inmates of the German concentration camps, Jews and communists and other people found unacceptable by Hitler. They composed this song in the concentration camps. It then became a theme song of the German brigade, which was the Tailman Brigade in the Spanish Civil War.
Wir sind immer Soldaten und sehen mit dem Spaten ins Moor. Wir sind immer Soldaten und sehen mit dem Spaten ins Moor. Doch für uns blieb es ein Schlagen, ewig kann nicht Winter sein.
Die Moorsoldaten, the Peat Bog Soldiers, sung by Ernest Bush and chorus. Why did you and your husband, Esmond Romilly, elect to emigrate to the United States?
Well, when we first went over, it wasn't really with the idea of emigrating. But as you probably know, you can't get jobs in America unless you're on an immigration visa, which we got. But the purpose, I think, was the despairing feeling after the Munich betrayal by Chamberlain and the capitulation to Hitler. And we could see, the appeasement people in this country, including, of course, the fascists and people like Sir Oswald Mosley, who's now my brother-in-law, were beginning to dominate the political scene in a terrifying fashion. We thought that war was bound to break out, but we would stay in America until it broke out and then return home. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Esmond did come back. He volunteered for the Air Force, but he was killed after he'd been there a short time.
Yes, and you were left with the baby daughter, Constantia.
Yes.
What did you do to live?
Well, I had various jobs. Finally, in Washington, I learned a little bit of typing and got a job in the American government with a very disheartening job description of sub-eligible typist.
Oh, dear. But you made that office work your way eventually.
I did a little bit, yes, in some ways. In other words, it was really a very important agency. It was the one to hold down prices and to enforce rationing and so on. And that was what I found enjoyable, because at least it really did seem part of America's war effort after America got into the war. And so it was, it was a good job for me.
Well, then you married again, a man you met in that department.
That's right, a lawyer in the same department.
A man of a very different background to your own.
Right.
And you both joined the American Communist Party and began working very actively. Now, for what? The overthrow of the American government, world revolution, what was the big thing?
Well, of course, it would have been nice to overthrow it. But actually, what we were mainly working for at the beginning, and the whole Communist Party position then, was the strongest possible prosecution of the war against Hitler. So this was the first thing, you see, and that was during the war when we were in about 1943, and we'd moved to California by then. Well, then after the war, I got mostly active in the civil rights movement, that is, rights for black people. And that became sort of the all-absorbing passion of life for a very long time, for a number of years, in fact.
Yes. And then you became rather disillusioned with the cause.
No, I don't think I ever got exactly disillusioned. It was that the Communist Party took what I thought was a hopelessly bad position in regards to a number of things, particularly in regards to, permitting itself to be continually dominated by foreign communist parties, principally the Soviet Union, instead of striving in the direction of a radical American movement.
Are you still a communist? Do you consider yourself one?
I'm not a party member. I still feel that the goals of communism, which are essentially the fair distribution of the Earth's resources, is probably the only way, in the end, to create a decent world.
Let's have record number 5. What's that to be?
That well-known anthem, the Red Flag, which used to be, I don't know if it still is, the official anthem of the Labour Party of Great Britain as well as of the Communist Party, except that we communists used to sing, "The people's flag is palest pink, it's not as red as you might think," to tease the Labour Party.
flag sung by the Centenary Choir. Now, your career as a writer, Miss Mitford, you began with a light-hearted, or fairly light-hearted, piece of autobiography, Ons and Rebels. Why did you write that? What inspired you to?
Well, you know, in one way you could say that the reason I started writing at all was because after the civil rights movement folded up, which I was so involved in the 50s, I found myself in around 1956, almost middle-aged. I was already 38 or so, and totally unemployable because I still had no job skills. And so, having nothing else to do, I just started writing.
And after that first piece of autobiography, 3 books about the American way of life and death.
Well, The American Way of Death, of course, was tremendous fun to write, and actually the repercussions of it are still tremendous fun, because the undertakers got furious. It's really a tease on the undertakers. They're absurd caskets and burial footwear and things you wouldn't believe unless you'd actually seen them, as I have. And so that was fun to do.
And the other 2?
Well, one was about the trial of Dr. Spock. That was at the height of the Vietnam War, when the famous Dr. Spock, who wrote the baby book, and other people were indicted for conspiracy to aid and abet draft resistors. And so the trial was jolly interesting in Boston. So I went and covered that and wrote a book. And then I did another one about prisons, which came out a few years ago. The American Prison Business, it's called here.
This was another campaigning book.
Yes, it was. It was about the injustices of the prison system in America.
And now you've written another slab of autobiography, A Final Conflict.
Yes.
This brings the story a little further up to date. Not quite up to date.
No, it ends about 63. It ends, really, with writing The American Way of Death.
Mm-hmm. And it appears exactly at the same time as your sister Diana's autobiography.
I know, it's rather a pity. It's what the Evening Standard calls a boom in the Mitford industry.
Are we to expect a Vol 3?
I hope not. I'm sure the English reading public earnestly trusts that it will be spared of all 3.
Let's have record 6.
Record 6. Lullaby of Broadway, a wonderful song which I heard before I came to America and which symbolized America to me. People used to say, you know, America's not a bit like the musicals and the movies that you've seen. I thought it was exactly like that, and that's why I've chosen Lullaby of Broadway.
Come on along and listen to the lullaby of Broadway, the hip hooray and ballyhoo, the lullaby of Broadway, the rumble of the subway train, the rattle of the taxis, the daffodils who entertain at Angelo's and Maxine's when the Broadway baby says goodnight. It's early in the morning. Manhattan babies don't sleep tight until the dawn.
The Lullaby of Broadway, sung by Winnie Shaw on the soundtrack of Gold Diggers of 1935. You're on this island, which isn't a bad island. The climate is good, there's fresh water, there's everything you need. Are you a practical person? Could you look after yourself?
Oh, dear. I wish you hadn't asked that. I'd be hopeless, actually.
You're not a good cook?
Well, see, Bob does all the cooking at home.
Your husband?
Yes.
Does he do all the housework as well?
Well, he really does do quite a lot of it. I mean, whatever's done in the way of repairs and so forth is rather done by him, and shopping.
What do you do?
Well, I write, because he practices law. It's not a very fair division, but he likes all those things, and I don't especially.
Would you try to escape?
You'll have to be looking out for a boat every second, absolutely.
Let's have record number 7.
The next record is Dancing Cheek to Cheek. Oh, dear, that was one of our favourite songs. In fact, when we were teenagers, my mother took 3 of us, Unity and Debo and myself, on a cruise of the Mediterranean. And there was dancing at night, you know. And there was a man there with a sort of huge, huge nose. And we called him the Chicken Man because of his large nose. So we used to sing Dancing Beak to Beak when dancing with him.
Heaven, I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak, and I seem to find the happiness I see when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek.
Fred Astaire singing Cheek to Cheek from Top Hat. Once again, 1935. What's your last record going to be, number 8?
It's going to be You're Going to Lose Your Girl. You see, the point about that record is that there was a song, again, when we were children, that used to be very popular. I don't suppose anybody's heard of it today, but I'm frightfully glad we found it. But Debo, the youngest of us, was a tremendous thumb sucker, and she sucked on until she was 9 years old, as a consequence of which one thumb is about half an inch shorter than the other one, and it's sort of rather splayed out, if you know what I mean, and short. So we used to sing You're Going to Lose Your Thumb to the song of You're Going to Lose Your Girl, to that tune.
You're Going to Lose Your Girl by Carol Gibbons and the Savoy Hotel Orpheans. If you could take just one of your 8 records, which would it be?
It would be the Peat Bog Soldiers, I think. A very stirring song.
And one luxury to take to the island with you.
I think I'd have a small tin of gentleman's relish from Fortnum's.
For your tea?
Well, it's because we were never allowed it. It was considered too expensive for children.
What are you going to have it on? Because...
Oh, that's true. No buttered toast, eh?
No buttered toast.
Oh, well, there you are. I'll be hopeless.
Nevertheless, we'll give you a very large supply of it. And one book, apart from the Bible and Shakespeare as the conventionally obvious choices, and we don't allow big encyclopedias.
Well, there's a marvellous book called Orphan Island. It was one of the first grown-up books I'd ever read. You know, when you're about 10 or 9 and you've read a full-length book, you feel rather proud. Mm-hmm. And this book by Rose Macaulay is fascinating. It's a funny and wonderful book.
Splendid. Well, thank you, Jessica Mitford, for letting us hear your Desert Island Discs.
Thanks ever so much.
Goodbye, everyone.
You've been listening to a podcast from the Desert Island Discs archive. For more podcasts, please visit bbc.co.uk/Radio4.